Hey everybody, it's Keylime again, this time with the class guide, and this time we're going to be chatting through some Stormcaller. It's a bunch of birds that does yellow mana stuff. End of guide. So basically Stormcaller is kind of interesting. So previously this was doing something not great and the devs were nice enough to change this to something very useful. So now this is actually conjuring a light storm at the start of every turn. So if you've watched any of my other content, you know that Sunspear is one of my favorite, if not my favorite class, and it does a very similar effect only with firestorms. So automatically I'm kind of interested in this class because this will force a light storm regardless. So if you have another team that you're fighting that's trying to change up the storm on you, you could always change it back, assuming you're not stunned. So this is actually pretty sweet. Shock is kind of interesting, so it's just kind of this passive 2 damage thing that you're doing constantly. The thing that's somewhat nice about this, they probably care less about the damage and more about the fact that this will poke down barriers. So if you're just looping constantly, this will allow you to kind of like poke out some barriers. Early game, this will be like a lot of damage that you're just kind of constantly doing, so that's kind of cool. But for late game players, this is much more of like a barrier destroying utility kind of thing. And all Strix gaining 2 life is kind of whatever. So when we look at the trees, we get some okay ones. Unfortunately, we get the wind tree. So the wind tree is kind of bad at everything. Everything in here is really not great. The only thing that you could argue is somewhat useful for this class would be Strix allies all gaining 1 attack every turn. So since this class is a Strix type and you will likely potentially be running this with other Strix, this will be at least semi-useful. However, this is still a very slow attack gain. If your game is lasting 10 turns and you're getting 10 attack out of that, that's probably pretty rare. So not the worst level 100 talent, but really not the best. It also has elementals getting 1 magic whenever you cast a spell, so this might theoretically be more useful than this one. But it's really going to depend on what your team lineup is. But beyond all of that, so with the life tree, we have the ability to self-cleanse yourself, so that's kind of cool. You also get the ability to fairy fire a random enemy when an ally dies, which is okay if that's kind of your bag. You have access to Storm Aura, which would normally be interesting, but since this class is constantly running a light storm, that's not as interesting. You have the ability to gain life every time you match green gems, so that's kind of okay. You get access to Lightning Strike, which is definitely more useful. So as far as what this class should be as far as levels go, level 70 is about where it would cap off. You can get it level 100 if you want, but this is kind of one of the issues that is kind of jumping out at me as far as the Stormcaller class is concerned. So the traits that it has is interesting, but unfortunately it doesn't really have a useful support talent tree to go with it. So basically all this does is enables you to create a lot of yellow mana, and that's about all the class does. You don't do a whole lot else. You'll self-cleanse yourself, and you'll be able to bounce a gem every time you do a 4-5, but that's about it. So if we're going to build effective teams around this, the most effective thing we can be doing is leveraging its Strix nature. So the fact that it's a Strix, the fact that you can do other stuff with other Strix, with mixed weapons, there's a couple that would be useful to us. That's pretty much going to be the main thing. Because aside from that, there are other classes that also can start at least with the Light Storm, but not necessarily have as much power over the storms as this class would. But what it's bringing to the table is a little less. It's not offering a bunch that you can work with. So let's check out some troops that goes with the Stormcaller. If we're looking at some troops that are good with the Stormcaller class, naturally the first thing you want to look at is Strixie troops. Since this is a Strix class, Strix troops will naturally align with what it's trying to do. So if we look at Strix, we kind of see this mix of people. So generally I find Strix to be very interesting, but not necessarily the most effective. And there's a couple reasons for this. So all of these troops are very cool. Like Phoenicia has probably one of the highest damage potentials in the game, but it does require a Firestorm to be running, so not very useful for us since we're never going to have a Firestorm running. Garuda would make a Firestorm, however, he doesn't loop in any capacity, so we can't use Garuda to try and set up Phoenicia. So normally the game is trying to get you to run these two together or run this with Sunspear or something, but unfortunately we will not be able to look at either of these. Queen Xochi is obviously super nice because she takes yellow herself. She explodes the board if there's a storm running. Of course, there will be. She has a chance to summon a Harpy Mage, which is also kind of fun, which Harpy Mage is just exploding the board. It does summon a Dust Storm, however, that'll just go away the next turn, so that's really not that big a deal. It has Swift, so it will start super duper quick. Taloka is kind of cool because he's doing like a lot of damage since there's always going to be a storm running, and he is doing passive 10 damage to people whenever you do a 4 or 5. If you're looping a lot, this will actually get you some pretty decent damage, so you'll kind of whittle away at people pretty decently with this. He's kind of more of a passive troop and a cleanup kind of troop. Basically only ever really cast him when there's like 2 enemies left, and he'll clean up pretty much whoever's left. But then we've got Bladewing. She's super cool. So 20% chance to just kill people, disgusting. And then of course the epic 5% chance to summon a Harpy whenever you start your turn. So Bladewing, if you pray to the lords, she might just kill people for you. Probably not though. But there's not a ton of super effective Strix in here. So like Queen Xochi is very consistent and useful. She's kind of like a Strix Infernus of some kind. Not nearly as good as Infernus, but she kind of does that kind of a role. Taloka is a very good cleanup kind of troop. So Strix-wise, Harpy Mage, Queen Xochi, and Taloka are probably the best ones when it comes to a Stormcaller class. However, since we are just looking at yellow people, we need to look at who are the cool yellow mythics that might run well with this. So Arachnine Weaver is actually very cool. So Arachnine Weaver is yellow, and he does some really cool stuff with true damage, so that's obviously super nice. The fact that he can summon a web spinner is also useful if you happen to die. Infernus is okay. We can't really do anything with the burning aspect of this. The only potential you could do is if you wanted to be super cheeky, you might be able to put an Infernus on your team and a Phoenicia on your team, and then have Infernus kill somebody, so that way a Firestorm starts, and then within the same turn, since it might loop, you could cast Phoenicia to do a ton of damage right behind him. That is a very bad combo. I would never suggest trying to pair them together, but it's a thing. You could totally try it. Queen Aurora, super defensive kind of troop, could be useful. Worldbreaker could be useful since he would be able to keep looping into himself since he'd always have a light storm going, so that's okay. Voice of Orpheus, pretty cool since he is going to cleanse everybody with yellow matches, so he's somebody that kind of fits naturally. He also will get you some mana generation and a super hard nuke, so that could be fun. Divine Ishbala, definitely interesting because she is going to give all divines a 40% start. There's a lot of really nice divines. She also is converting green into yellow, so you will have a lot more yellow mana to work with, and then reds into skulls. Unfortunately, the Stormcaller class isn't really useful with skulls, however, skull damage never the worst thing on the planet. So, you know, from like a troop perspective, it's a little hard. I mean, basically you want to be putting together yellow things with the team because it's all yellow dependent. However, I will say that probably the highest tier Stormcaller troop would be Leprechaun. So Leprechaun is kind of somebody who allows you to do stuff with that light storm like right away. So Leprechaun is going to explode the board right at the start. He's empowered, so he'll just get going right at the start. He gets bonus green in case you care about that. I mean, at a minimum, the Nimbus bow does take green, so that's kind of there. And speaking of, there's a couple weapons that we should be talking about. So there is the Nimbus bow. Nimbus bow is going to be creating a mix of blue and yellow, which is kind of nice. Boosted by Strix. Your Strix yourself, if you put them with 3 other Strix, that'll be kind of cool. The other nice thing about this weapon is that it silences the first enemy, so that's kind of fun. It also makes another yellow, so that helps its loot potential a little bit. It does enchant yourself, which is kind of whatever, and it creates a light storm. Perfect. We needed those. The other one is the Plume Staff. So the Plume Staff is doing something very similar. You're from Suncrest and you're a Strix, so this will do a mix of yellow and purple if that's your bag. From an upgrade point of view, it doesn't do nearly as much, however, so it's not really doing anything interesting here. It is creating a light storm, though. That's awesome for this class. But this is kind of working based on Suncrest allies specifically. You'll notice that Suncrest, if you sort by that instead of Strix, it will look very, very similar. So in terms of what you're looking at, it almost looks like I just sorted by Strix. The things that you kind of get in here that weren't here before is like Doom of Light, Chupacabra, Sunbird, but that's like basically it. I mean, Harpy Eagle's in there, super legit. But there's not much in here that gets added. So basically the weapon just becomes another type of thing that you could use if you happen to want yellow and purple versus yellow and blue. However, I'd say the Nimbus bow is doing significantly more interesting stuff since it will silence the first enemy and has loot potential on it, so that's actually a lot more useful. So that's unfortunately it as far as the troops and the weapons that kind of go nicely. I will quickly talk about the weapon that came with the class, because it is actually noteworthy. So if we look at the weapon that came with the class, it's Thunderbird. So this is doing 31 true damage to a specific targeted enemy, which is a decent amount, and then it's actually doing 15 true damage to everybody. So that's actually a decent amount of true damage that it can do just straight up. There will of course be a storm running since we are running a Stormcaller class. The other weird thing about this that I'll mention real quick is that it removes the storm. This is a weird mechanic in the sense that you will always have a storm at the start of your turn. So basically what this is saying is that even though it's recognizing that you're giving your turn over to them, it's going to turn the storm off. So they'll have to have some way of starting a storm if they're trying to keep things going. You'll find that this isn't really all that interesting, but it is kind of an interesting mechanic. I think it would be more interesting if there was ways to turn off storms with weapons that actually loop. That could be more fun, but this in general is kind of, it's whatever. It exists. As far as what else it does, it's really nothing else all that interesting. It does drain a little mana from the first enemy, so that can be fun and annoying. A little bit of scatter damage, that can also be fun and annoying. But what's kind of fun about this is how you can pair it with other things to do interesting stuff. So we did put together some teams. We will start with the low one. So for the low team, this is really taking advantage of the fact that we'll always have a light storm going, so we'll have tons of yellow mana, and both of these troops take yellow mana and work off of yellow mana, and Leprechaun should get all the yellow mana that you want for your team. So Volthornax is exploding a gem, and then for every yellow you catch, it's boosting it by 4. So the amount of damage you'll do to all will actually look pretty decent with this boost on it, so that's kind of fun. And then Elwyn's in there because his boost is Psycho Mode. He's going to be boosting a lot if you catch any yellows in this just row or column, so like a plus symbol from wherever you click. Every yellow you catch is going to be doing ×7, so he can just outright snipe people in the early game, so that's kind of fun. Prismatic Orb is really in there just to help you with more mana generation, and just so that way you can have your class in the lineup. Volthornax, if you do trade him, will get you some skull reduction, so that's kind of fun as well. And he does give himself more life. So this team will be able to punch through the early game super easy. From a mid-game perspective, we do get to play around with the actual Nimbus Bow and Strix kind of lineup. So this lineup is basically taking advantage of Queen Xochi and the Nimbus Bow and the Harpy Mage all just looping. So this should get you casting a lot. You'll silence people here, you'll do some decent damage with Queen Xochi, and then Taloka's really just there to be doing passively 10 damage and then clean up whatever's left at the end of the fight. So this team from an early game to mid game perspective should be totally great, just like run through some stuff. If you're trying to find these troops, you'd have to go to the Stone Song Eyrie in the Underworld and open up some treasure chests. That'll get you access to these folks. So that team, also pretty fun. From a high-level team perspective, this is where we get to use that interaction that I just talked about. So this is going to be using the Thunderbird weapon, which is going to basically get some true damage onto people, and then you'll be able to pick off somebody at the bottom and then blow them up with Arachneid Weaver. So that's kind of fun. And then for the best team in the game, clearly what you need to be doing here is betting it all on Blade Wing, and you just pray, and then you kill some people, and it's super sick, and you have no idea, and you're wrong, and if you argue with me, I will get angry. This is the best. Blade Wing, zap people dead, 20% chance to kill people. It just kills them. It doesn't even matter. This is the best troop in the game. This is the best team in the game. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it from you guys at all. Don't at me, etc., etc. So that is the Stormcaller class. So I think unfortunately, I have to end this video with a quick, why would you run the Stormcaller class over other classes kind of thing. And I think that's kind of where we run into problems. So as I mentioned before when we were looking through this is kind of the most noteworthy thing about it, is that it will have a consistent light storm. But from a talent tree perspective, there's nothing in here that's really making this class like sing, scream, do something powerful, create a bunch of synergy that didn't exist before. It's not offering enough utility, or basically any utility. So because of that, if yellow is what you care about, War Priest is a class. This will start with a light storm if you so choose, and then it also comes with other fun stuff. So I like this class actually a lot. You'll have 50% chance to stun at the start of every turn. That can end up being pretty useful. It has skull reduction, so it's a pretty decent frontliner. The fact that it's a human type means that the Orpheus Verse weapon is a thing that you can use, which is super great. So unfortunately, War Priest is a team or a class that if you're looking to just use a light storm start, can get you moving a lot faster, have a lot more utility, do a lot more interesting things than the Stormcaller. Being a human type offers it more synergy with other humans as well. So that'll give you access again to the Orpheus first weapon, potentially Holy Saint Astra as a counterpart. Possessed King is also human, so Orpheus verse and Possessed King go together. There's a lot of more things you can do with a human War Priest versus a strict Stormcaller. The other thing that you'd obviously have to look at would be the actual Priest class. So the actual Priest class is going to give you bonus yellow mana. It's also going to give you even more bonus yellow mana if you get it to 70. It can do the same healing yourself thing, cleansing yourself thing, but it also does start with a Light Storm, and it is also Divine. So Divine Ishbala will synergize much more nicely with this class because it'll give it a 40% mana start, and there's also other extremely nice Divine troops such as Ubistet, such as Infernus, such as Queen Aurora. There's a bunch of Divines that are yellow, even Voice of Orpheus is another. So being able to have Divine Ishbala synergize with your hero class and then all the other cool Divines that exist, Priest class is kind of offering a lot of awesome things as well. So that creates a problem for the Stormcaller. Basically, my recommendation would be if you want to use the Nimbus bow specifically, this would be a class that would be a lot more interesting to you. The team that I showed you before would run just as well with a War Priest or a Priest on it versus a Stormcaller, admittedly. So there's no real reason why you would have to run my super true damage snipey kind of team with this class specifically. It's just going to be a team that you can use to basically farm tier 3 PvP fights as much as you want. So I think that's kind of the problem, at least as it stands now. I think we need some other interesting Strix kind of troops to make this class really, really sing. That or the trees need to get updated in some way, so that way the win tree is not just a complete zero as far as effectiveness for this class. But that is everything for the Stormcaller. Not the worst, not the best. I suspect it'll be probably in the low C tier, mid C tier when we go to the tier list video. But that is all. This is a guide. I am Keylime. And subscribe, and all that fun stuff. Okay, bye.